The scalding coffee hit Denise Freeman's designer suit like a declaration of war. Carmen Rodriguez stood above her with that familiar smirk, the one that said she'd gotten away with something terrible and knew it. "Oops," Carmen whispered, her voice dripping with fake innocence as the dark liquid spread across the cream-colored fabric. But when Denise calmly reached for her phone and made one quiet call, something extraordinary happened. The massive Boeing 747, moments away from takeoff, suddenly stopped moving on the runway. And Carmen's world was about to change forever. It had started like any other Tuesday morning at JFK International Airport. Flight 447 to London Heathrow was running on schedule, packed with the usual mix of business travelers, tourists, and those lucky enough to snag upgrades. In C2A of first class sat Denise Freeman, a woman whose presence commanded respect without demanding attention. At 45, she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of breaking barriers and exceeding expectations. Her dark skin glowed with health. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, and her tailored navy suit spoke of success earned, not inherited. Denise had boarded early, settled into her seat with the efficiency of someone who traveled frequently, and immediately pulled out a stack of financial reports. She preferred to use flight time productively, and today's reading material was particularly important. The documents in her briefcase would inform decisions that could affect thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in federal contracts. But to Carmen Rodriguez, the senior flight attendant making her pre-flight rounds, Denise was just another passenger who probably didn't belong in first class. Carmen had been flying for 15 years, long enough to develop what she called passenger radar. She could spot the frequent flyers, the nervous first-timers, and especially those who she believed were seated above their station. When she saw Denise in 2A, her mind immediately began calculating. The woman was well-dressed, sure, but Carmen had seen plenty of people max out credit cards for one fancy outfit. Probably used miles for an upgrade, she thought, or got bumped up because of some computer error. It happened all the time, and Carmen had made it her personal mission to remind these passengers that first class came with expectations they might not understand. The subtle discrimination began immediately. When Carmen offered newspapers to the other first-class passengers, she somehow forgot to stop at 2A. When she took drink orders, she suggested the house wine to Denise while recommending the premium vintages to other passengers. Her tone, while never outright rude, carried that particular brand of condescension that every black person recognized but couldn't quite prove. It was the voice that said, "I'm being professional, but we both know you don't really belong here." Denise noticed, of course. After decades in corporate America and government service, she could read these situations like a familiar book. She'd learned long ago that responding to every slight would exhaust her spirit and derail her mission. Instead, she maintained her composure, answered Carmen's passive-aggressive questions with grace, and continued reading her reports. She had more important things to focus on than one flight attendant's prejudices. But Carmen wasn't finished. As the plane pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, she started the beverage service with theatrical enthusiasm. She fawned over the businessman in 1A, practically giggling at his mediocre jokes. She spent extra time helping the elderly woman in 1C choose between champagne and orange juice. And when she finally reached Denise, her demeanor shifted like a storm cloud moving across the sun. "What can I get you?" Carmen asked, her voice flat and impatient. "Coffee would be lovely, thank you," Denise replied warmly, looking up from her documents with a genuine smile. Carmen nodded curtly and moved on. Denise watched her go, noting the way the flight attendant's entire posture changed when she served other passengers. It was fascinating, really, how prejudice revealed itself in these small moments. Carmen probably thought she was being subtle, but to someone trained to observe human behavior and systemic discrimination, she might as well have been carrying a neon sign. The coffee took longer than it should have. Denise watched Carmen serve other passengers, take special requests, and even return to 1A twice when the businessman decided he wanted something different. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, Carmen approached with a coffee cup balanced on a small tray. What happened next would later be dissected in corporate training videos and discrimination lawsuits. Carmen approached Denise's seat with the coffee, but instead of the careful, professional service she'd provided to other passengers, her movements were rushed and careless. Whether by design or negligent disregard, she caught her foot on something that wasn't there and lurched forward. The entire contents of the cup, and it was notably fuller and hotter than the coffee she'd served others, splashed across Denise's lap and chest. The liquid was scalding. Denise gasped as it soaked through her suit jacket and blouse, the heat shocking against her skin. The cream-colored fabric immediately darkened with ugly brown stains that she knew would never come out. Around her, other passengers turned at the commotion, some half rising from their seats in concern. "Oh my goodness!" Carmen exclaimed, but there was something theatrical about her surprise. "I'm so sorry." "You moved so suddenly I couldn't help but—" "I didn't move," Denise said quietly, dabbing at her suit with the inadequate napkins Carmen had finally provided. Her voice remained steady, but fellow passengers could see the steam literally rising from her clothes. "Well, these things happen," Carmen continued, her apology already morphing into justification. "Maybe if you'd been paying attention instead of buried in those papers. Sometimes in first class, passengers need to be more aware of their surroundings." The implication was clear. This was somehow Denise's fault for not being grateful enough, alert enough, deferential enough. Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The man in 1D started to say something, but Denise caught his eye and shook her head slightly. She could handle this herself. "Could you please get me some club soda and more napkins?" Denise asked calmly. "I'll see what I can find," Carmen replied, already turning away. Though I should mention, dry cleaning bills aren't typically covered by the airline. Accidents happen, you know. That was the moment Denise Freeman decided she'd had enough. Not just for herself, but for every passenger who would face this kind of treatment in the future. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she needed. The call was brief and quiet. "This is Denise Freeman," she said, her voice barely audible above the aircraft noise. "Flight 447 to Heathrow. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." She paused, listening. "Yes, I'm certain. Please execute Protocol 7 immediately." Carmen, returning with a few more napkins and no club soda, caught the tail end of the conversation. "Calling your lawyer?" she asked with a smirk. "Good luck with that. These things happen in air travel. Part of the experience." Denise simply smiled and put her phone away. "Something like that," she said. Within minutes, something strange began happening. The aircraft, which had been steadily taxiing toward the runway, began to slow. Then it stopped completely. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom with an announcement that sent ripples of confusion through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Henderson. We've been instructed to return to the gate due to an urgent operational matter. We apologize for the delay and will provide more information as it becomes available." Carmen's confident smirk began to waver. Planes didn't just turn around on the taxiway without serious cause. Around the cabin, passengers started murmuring, checking their phones and craning their necks to see what was happening outside. Through the windows, they could see ground vehicles beginning to surround their aircraft. "What's going on?" the businessman in 1A asked Carmen directly. I'm not sure," she admitted, her earlier bravado evaporating. "Probably just some routine maintenance issue." But even as she said it, Carmen knew this wasn't routine. In 15 years of flying, she'd never seen a response like this. Airport security vehicles, ground crew, and what looked like official cars were converging on their plane like it was a crime scene. Her eyes drifted back to Denise, who continued reading her papers as if nothing unusual was happening. The plane reached the gate with mechanical precision, and immediately the jet bridge extended. But instead of passengers deplaning, uniformed security officers boarded. Their leader, a tall man with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, scanned the first-class cabin until his eyes found Carmen. "Miss Rodriguez? I need you to come with us, please." Carmen's face went white. I. What's this about? I haven't done anything wrong. Ma'am, please gather your things and come with us. We'll explain everything once we're off the aircraft. As Carmen fumbled for her belongings, her hands shaking, Captain Henderson himself emerged from the cockpit. The sight of the captain in the passenger cabin was unusual enough, but his destination made it extraordinary. He walked directly to seat 2A, where Denise Freeman continued reading her reports as if planes were grounded for her convenience every day. Ms. Freeman, Captain Henderson said, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and barely concealed panic. I cannot express how deeply sorry I am about this incident. The entire crew is mortified, and I want you to know that this kind of behavior is absolutely not representative of our airline's values. Other passengers began pulling out their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The businessman in 1A leaned forward, suddenly very interested in the conversation. The elderly woman in 1C whispered to her companion, "Who is she?" Denise looked up from her papers and smiled graciously at the captain. I appreciate that, Captain Henderson. I'm sure we can work through this situation appropriately. If there's anything at all, that we can do to make this right. Actually, Denise said, closing her folder and giving the captain her full attention, this incident will serve as a valuable case study. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected circumstances. Carmen, being escorted down the aisle by security, caught fragments of the conversation. Case study? What kind of passenger talked about case studies? And why was the captain treating this woman like she was important? The answer came in pieces over the following hours, as news of the incident spread through the airline's corporate hierarchy like wildfire. Denise Freeman wasn't just any passenger. She was the newly appointed Director of Aviation Safety for the Federal Aviation Administration, one of the most powerful regulatory positions in the industry. She had been traveling incognito as part of a new program designed to assess airline service standards from the passenger perspective. Her report would directly influence federal oversight, safety certifications, and operating licenses for major carriers. The coffee incident had just become a federal case study in discrimination and customer service failure. Carmen learned this while sitting in an airport security office, watching her 15-year career dissolve in real time. The airline's regional manager had arrived within an hour, followed by corporate executives who spoke in hushed, urgent tones about damage control and federal investigations. They explained to Carmen with excruciating detail exactly who she had targeted with her prejudice and what the consequences might be. Do you understand, the regional manager asked, that you deliberately spilled hot coffee on a federal aviation official who was conducting an undercover service evaluation? Carmen's world tilted. She didn't look like... how was I supposed to know? That's exactly the point, the executive replied coldly. You made assumptions based on her race and treated her accordingly. It wouldn't matter if she was a federal official or a minimum wage worker. Discrimination is unacceptable. But targeting someone whose report could impact thousands of jobs and millions in federal contracts? That's a career-ending mistake. Back on the plane, Denise was graciously accepting apologies from a parade of airline officials who had materialized as if from thin air. The CEO himself had called her personal phone, his voice shaking as he promised comprehensive policy reviews and mandatory sensitivity training for all staff. But Denise's response surprised everyone. I don't want anyone to lose their jobs over this, she told the executives. What I want is systematic change. This incident tells me that your current training programs aren't working. Your diversity and inclusion initiatives aren't reaching the front lines, and your customers are suffering because of it. She outlined her vision for what would later become known as the Freeman Standards, a comprehensive framework for respectful customer service that would become an industry benchmark. Rather than seeking punitive measures, she wanted to transform this moment of personal humiliation into systemic improvement. 6 months later, the ripple effects were still spreading through the aviation industry. Carmen Rodriguez, after intensive sensitivity training and a genuine process of self-reflection, had become an unexpected advocate for inclusive service. She regularly spoke at training seminars, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unconscious bias and the importance of treating every passenger with dignity. The airline had implemented the Freeman standards across its entire network, and customer satisfaction scores had improved dramatically. Other carriers began adopting similar programs, and the Federal Aviation Administration started requiring anti-discrimination training as part of crew certification. Denise Freeman's stained suit had been dry cleaned and donated to the Smithsonian's collection on civil rights history, where it served as a reminder that progress often comes in the most unexpected moments. The incident report she filed became required reading in business schools and government training programs, a masterclass in turning personal adversity into positive change. The story spread beyond the aviation industry, becoming a viral sensation that sparked conversations about unconscious bias, the power of assumptions, and the importance of treating every person with respect. Comment sections filled with similar stories from people who had faced discrimination in travel, retail, and professional settings. But what resonated most with viewers wasn't the moment of injustice, it was Denise's response to it. She hadn't sought revenge. She hadn't tried to destroy Carmen's career or embarrass the airline publicly. Instead, she had channeled her influence and authority toward creating lasting change. The phone call that grounded the plane wasn't an act of vindictive power. It was the beginning of a transformation that would benefit countless future passengers. The final lesson of Flight 447 wasn't about the dangers of discrimination or the consequences of prejudice, though both were important. It was about the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and using your position to lift others up. Denise Freeman didn't ground that plane for herself. She grounded it for every passenger who would fly after her, ensuring they would be treated with the dignity every human being deserves. In the end, respect isn't determined by someone's appearance, their seat assignment, or the assumptions others make about their background. Every person you encounter might be someone who can change your world, but more importantly, every person deserves dignity simply because they're human. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't anger or revenge, it's the quiet determination to ensure it never happens again.